Well, hello there, YouTubeville. Thanks for stopping by. Time for episode 25 of Stir Crazy, where we sit around and talk real shit about the news, brought to you by the Real News Network. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Coming up on today's program, boys and girls, the pandemic has really touched every single part of our society, but what are the long and short-term effects it's going to have on the kids? This is a generation that's now being told they got to stay inside, far more social protections in terms of touching and etiquette and all this different stuff. Everything has changed for these kids. So what are the impacts on them being felt right now? What about the kids who are distance learning with no Wi-Fi? What about the parents who are going crazy by having to actually deal with their kids all day? And what do the teachers think about all this? We're going to get into all that. Also, AOC and Elizabeth Warren are joining together like the Wonder Twins. They are teaming up on a bill that would, in effect, prevent Wall Street from swallowing and gobbling up struggling small businesses right now. Y'all, this is exactly what happened in the last Great Recession Depression, when there was a consolidation of resources, money, and at the end of the day, power. I'm glad AOC and Liz Warren are willing to tackle this very important issue. Also, we are looking ahead to May Day protests tomorrow. I know you have all heard about all the big actions planned from most of the essential workers that are still having to go out there and earn a living during this pandemic. We know Target, Walmart, Amazon, Whole Foods, Instacart, the list goes on. But Walmart workers in particular are taking really important steps to protect themselves. We're going to talk about that coming up a little later. Listen, of course, we always love you. We love to hear from you. You guys get it in, get it mixed up, fired up, all in the comments and in the chat. So don't forget to do that. Like and subscribe also, so we know that y'all like us or dislike us, for all the haters out there, but that's okay. But listen, right now it's time for us to bring in our esteemed panel, our lovely panel today. Here we go. Y'all heard it. Yes, ladies' night. Oh, what a night. Yes. All right, gang. Our panelists today are Dr. Khalilah Harris. She is the Managing Director of K-12 Education Policy at the Center for American Progress. And of course, we have a Stir Crazy fan favorite, always back, Jacqueline Luqman. She got all the smoke, all the fire. Everyone, Jackie, every time you get on the show, the comments light up with fire, flame emojis. Of course, Jackie is a host and producer here at The Real News. She's also co-host of the radio show By Any Means Necessary. It airs on Radio Sputnik. Ladies, we are a trio today. How are you guys doing?
Fabulous. How are you all?
You want my real answer or you want my for television answer?
No, girl, real answer, because this ain't TV. We on the internet. You can say however you feel.
Well, every day I take pride in leadership at the Harris School for Excellence in Black Liberation. My 3 scholars, I actually almost had to cancel my cleaning contract the other day because the janitorial staff, they were putting the toilet paper under instead of over. So I was going to go down to the school board to ask them to terminate that contract. But then I realized nobody would be around to clean my house. So I stopped. Otherwise, I'm waiting.
Well, good. And Khalilah, you have a unique position on this panel because you are the only parent of school-age children. And I mean, we can start right there, hon. You said you have three young students living in your home. I assume the schools are closed. So how have you been managing with distance learning and I guess otherwise occupying kids? I don't know how kids work.
Oh, I can occupy my children. Well, let me say this. 2 of them are teenagers. I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 10-year-old. 10-year-old is an extrovert and sometimes requires attention from the rest of us. But in general, they really are doing well and keeping up. I do have to provide support for the 10-year-old to make sure that she is staying on track with her assignments, that she's not getting overwhelmed, because the rule in our house was there were no screens during the school week. So 10-year-old who doesn't have a cell phone has gone from no screens to 5 hours a day and is trying to figure that out between friends and, who's chatting with who outside of the school stuff. So that's something new we're dealing with. My 17-year-old wasn't able to take the SAT this spring. And so now we're really trying to figure out what's going to happen when it comes to taking APs and SATs, as well as all of the campus visits we have planned that we're missing out on. But I say all of that in one breath, and in the next breath, I'd say that we are very fortunate, very privileged to have those first world problems when there are neighbors down the street, across the street, who don't have Wi-Fi at their home or access to a school that will provide computers readily before we had to get volunteers to do so. So we're hanging in there and doing as best as we can, just as everybody else is in this mass trauma that we're all experiencing.
Well, you talk about students and families and households that don't have access to Wi-Fi, and that is a major concern as most of the school districts across the country are closed. There's been some chatter about reopening, a lot of debate at the state level about when would be the best time to do that. But let's focus on the access issue for kids who are now forced to do school from home. And there's a story coming out of the central coast of California. I don't think this is unique per se, but this particular school district has come up with a way for kids to get on Wi-Fi, but they definitely have to leave their houses to do that. Let's go to the first video, Dwayne.
Monterey Peninsula Unified School District has set up Wi-Fi buses around town to help with distance learning. Parents can drive children to 3 different parking lots around town so that they can connect to the internet and do their online classwork. The district knows some children don't have access to Wi-Fi at home and are working with Redshift to bring internet to those homes. In the meantime, they've got the Wi-Fi buses. Parents can find them at the parking lot of Lucky in Marina, Dr. Martin Luther King School of the Arts, the parking lot in Seaside, and the Target parking lot in Sand City.
Jackie, when you see that there are Wi-Fi buses set up for children to have to leave their homes, go find where the bus is, set up a computer, it's a good thing it's in Central California because, if you were in Maryland, DC, or Virginia, you would have got rained on sitting out in the parking lot trying to get on the Wi-Fi. The fact that this country does not look at Wi-Fi as an essential need in the 21st century, what are your thoughts about this?
I mean, again, I don't know how many times I can say this throughout this crisis, but I'll probably say it a whole lot more. It's just another example of the gross failures of capitalism to meet the needs of everyday regular folks, right? Like the broadband companies, the internet companies, the phone companies, who are the companies that provide the internet access now. They should be providing free Wi-Fi, free broadband access to everyone. If not in general, then during this pandemic in states where there are stay-at-home orders. Because what's going to happen with these Wi-Fi buses is it's still going to leave people out, like people who don't have a car in order to drive to the location. Then people are going to have to take public transportation. And the assumption is, it's kind of weird that the assumption is that because the studies seem to show that children don't contract a severe form of this virus, then it's okay for them to go out and be around other people. That's crazy. I just think it's like, okay, yeah, I'm glad you thought of it, but man, you really didn't think through this, did you? But then when you think about it, it's like they also don't want to go that extra step of demanding of the telecommunications companies, y'all need to do better and just provide your shit for free for people who need it. That really is just that's how I see it.
Goats my goats, Jackie. I don't think you'll have any disagreement amongst us or, our audience that is quite enlightened. Thank you very much, Real News audience. Khalilah, I'm curious whether or not you have heard any anecdotal stories, whether or not any of your children's peers are experiencing additional challenges, not being able to do the lessons as everyone else. And in some places, it's not so much that the household lacks internet, but they require a certain amount of speed to do this constant video conferencing, right? It eats up a lot more. And in your case, you said you have 3 kids who are video learning right now. Your Wi-Fi getting ate up, honey. So I'm curious, have you heard people who are having these accessibility issues?
Absolutely. So if we take a step back, we know that there are thousands, if not millions, of young people whose school districts haven't even communicated, first and foremost. So that's an access issue in and of itself. We also know that there are young people, as you said, who don't have access to 1 gig, 2 gig, high speed internet that would make it possible to not only do Zooms or videos with the class, but when it's time for them to do independent learning, for them to be able to access those videos either. The other situation comes in when if you have a parent that's continuing to work and you're being cared for by an older sibling who might not be able to help you through your coursework, you then begin to see how access is not just about giving devices or temporary access to a hotspot or a Wi-Fi bus. It really is the whole spectrum of the quality of internet that your family is able to afford, the quality of the equipment your family is able to afford, how many people in the house are needing that equipment. And in a number of districts across the country, we're seeing technology being distributed to one family as opposed to one child. So, like myself, you have 2 students in high school. How do you divide up who uses the laptop on any given day? Add in a 3rd or a 4th child. You may be raising cousins. You may have foster youth in your home, and then so you have a range of issues. Then when you factor in families experiencing homelessness, that's just another issue that has not been resolved for. And my greater concern beyond this digital divide is that somehow people feel like provision of that equipment absolves them from the care that is due to the children, either to find them or to make sure that they are able to move through content with their classmates. Beyond that, educators are also experiencing trauma and were asked to jump back in and do work that they were not trained to do for the most part. And they then are having to fumble with equipment or have a camera on in their home in a break in privacy that they would not have previously accepted. Or if they're sharing a 2-bedroom apartment or a 1-bedroom and a den with someone, whether or not they want their students to have a window into that part of their lives. Inversely, you have people who are looking into the homes of families now and placing all kinds of judgments because they haven't had any professional development in culturally responsive and affirming behaviors and pedagogy. So there's just a range of issues that the technology won't be able to fix. But at a bare minimum, we need to rapidly close the digital divide and get some policy out there to, as you said, internet is a utility at this point, and it should be treated as a public utility. We should not be relying on corporations to decide whether or not we have access. And for our students who are in urban cores without it, our students who are in rural areas without it, that's really unconscionable. And this pandemic is bearing that out for all of us to see.
Absolutely. There was a story I want to go to out of Ocala, Florida, where another community, and again, unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, but we know that disproportionately communities of color experience these lack or disproportionate levels of access to internet and high-speed broadband. And these videos that I picked happen to be white communities, but maybe this is indicative of how broad a problem this is. Let's go to that video.
It hasn't been easy for Patty Carroll and her 3 children.
Once you get all of them on the Wi-Fi at home, then it's buckled down and nothing wants to open.
All enrolled in Marion County schools and all using distance learning right now.
And it's just it's too much for like the house internet. It can't handle it.
Which explains why we're talking to her in the parking lot of Lake Weir Middle School. As luck would have it, right when coronavirus first infected our way of life throughout the world, a citywide project to bring Wi-Fi was underway here in downtown Ocala. When the schools closed, it became clear by the city that those Wi-Fi access points would get more use by students at the schools.
We figured, hey, we have this opportunity to go ahead and provide some Wi-Fi for the kids to be able to do their homework or schoolwork.
We still have a few hiccups here and there, but actually our students are doing pretty amazing.
We spoke with Kevin Christian at Marion County Public Schools.
And many of the outlying areas in Marion County geographically are not serviced by reliable internet.
Back at Lake Weir Middle School, this parking lot is now equipped with free Wi-Fi.
I wanted to check out the Wi-Fi.
It's one of 10 schools in the county where Wi-Fi was put in.
That was WKMG News 8 out of the Orlando, Florida area. But ladies, as we try to figure out how to address the ongoing problems with education, these problems didn't occur right because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but a lot of these issues have been lingering generationally. But Congress did not seem to step up when it came to trying to help a lot of these struggling students. And in fact, they dumped billions of dollars in the stimulus, gave it to very wealthy colleges like Harvard University. Khalilah, can you tell us about how much more money, I should say, Harvard is sitting on as a result of the congressional bailout?
Well, I can tell you this, Harvard doesn't need any more money. And the fact that they are, in addition to other Ivy League and well-endowed universities, talking about cutting faculty salaries, laying people off, when Harvard has, I believe, the largest university endowment in the globe, if I'm not mistaken. Oxford maybe before them, but so be it. They need to tap into that endowment instead of using public dollars to fund their private institution. And we are seeing across the federal government, Betsy DeVos is seeking to have funds or incentivize a competition grant for governors to expand voucher programs and private school options for families, online for-profit institutions with public dollars, and public dollars should be used for public schools. So the fact that Harvard has more money than any one of us would be able to spend in 10 lifetimes, would be getting any of the stimulus money is really outlandish. It's really unconscionable. We have smaller institutions, state-run institutions that really have not had access to the same types of funding. And those dollars should be prioritized for those institutions.
Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting that I'm noticing about the way this response in education and a lot of other aspects of society, but education in particular, is playing out is that, now that middle America, poor white people are experiencing struggles in accessing education for their kids. Now it's a crisis. But when poor Black folks in the cities, and in rural areas, when poor Latinos, when Native Americans were experiencing these very same access issues long before the virus impacted us, because it was funny what that reporter said, when the virus changed our way of life. The virus didn't change our way of life. Our life has been difficult before the virus came along. Everybody else is just figuring out how unjust and unequal this system really is. So I think in that way, coronavirus has been almost like a great equalizer, not making things equal, but in exposing to people who didn't believe that the system was unequal, that, yeah, babe, it's unequal to you too. System don't care about you either. It's unfortunate that it took coronavirus to show people that, but here we are.
We've got a comment from YouTube from Adam X182. He says, since Hogan, I'm assuming he's referring to Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, since Hogan has been getting a lot of praise from liberals lately, what's his record on education like? He also says, love the show, by the way. I've been listening on Spotify, and this is the first time I've caught it live. Who knew we was on Spotify?
I did, but
did not know that.
How you doing, Adam?
Moving on up in the world. Thanks, Adam. See, Adam giving us information. See, I didn't even know anything about that. Now, Jackie, I know you're in DC. Khalilah,
Yes.
Where you live? Are you in DC or are you in Maryland?
I'm in Baltimore. And
your thoughts on Governor Hogan?
Oh, do I have thoughts now?
Ooh,
where do I begin?
Thoughts.
Listen, Governor Hogan has been doing a phenomenal job on the COVID pandemic management. He, in fact, has advised the National Guard to protect our testing kits from the president's son-in-law. So how you like me now? I guess the Republican Party might be reclaiming their cojones. So, here's the thing. Maryland was one of those states who did not return educational funding to pre-recession, and that is the 2008 recession funding, right? And so Governor Hogan would campaign on this idea that he has been spending the most ever on educational programming. And, in that moment, people were believing his storyline when they shouldn't have. The lockbox that was put around casino dollars in Maryland was proposed by the Democratic legislature. He then adopted it and then campaigned for his next office or his next term as governor as the person who created the lockbox. Where they do that at? And then he was touting how much money he's been spending on education. Well, sure, you're spending the most money on education than they spent in 1922 or 1957. And people would not push against that. He claimed Baltimore City schools were corrupt because they were not spending their facilities dollars. When he knew good and well the state was clawing money back because the structure of the school construction program requires you to establish your contracts at a point that if you don't do so, you cannot use the funding, right? So it's not like somebody stole it, put it in their pocket, but let Larry Hogan tell it, we're all in that, and he wasn't going to sign any bill for the Kerwin Commission, right? The Kerwin Commission, which he established. He said he was not going to support the $3.4 billion that was set aside by the state legislature. So Larry Hogan has done a poor job on education. And he's done a poor job on education, which is the only stipulation in Maryland's Constitution is that every student be provided an education. It is the only entitlement in our state constitution. But Larry Hogan has not created an economic development strategy for the state that would support quality options for public schools. That includes cutting the red line, that includes moving construction dollars to surround his properties so that he can be lucrative once he leaves office. So it's not just about the dollars that he's provided for schools and the dollars he's unwilling to provide for schools. It's not just about him trying to undermine the Black women leaders across the state. The few Black women leaders of our school systems, they all seem to come up and get a lot of pressure point from this administration, including Maryland State Department of Education. So if you want to know what he's doing about education, he's doing as much as other people, and that's not a lot. So I caution people from, people did this with Giuliani, and I'm a native New Yorker. After 9/11, they made it seem like he was this amazing superhero, and he was still messy Giuliani, bringing his mistress into Gracie Mansion while his wife still lives there. So I don't know why anyone's surprised with his alignment with Donald Trump right now, because he's the same person. Larry Hogan is a Republican. He's not a moderate Republican. His policies align with the Republican Party, and people need to be clear that things like private vouchers for public schools and underfunding and not willing to return funding to pre-recession 2008 levels is a depiction of how Larry Hogan prioritizes education. The whole they're wasting money is actually racially charged. It is a socioeconomic attack, and it is quite veiled, but not veiled at all. Be clear, he is saying, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. We know we didn't give you any boots. So that's an easy one for me. And I think people need to pay attention because he definitely is doing a great job right now in crisis. But the country's been in a crisis and our state has been in a crisis, which is why our educational outcomes have been dropping off from the time he started office until now.
That's the interesting thing to me about Larry Hogan. You know, he is sort of this media liberal darling. He's really close with the vice president. Trump took a swipe at him. That sort of raised his profile some. But Larry Hogan, as have other governors, both Republican and Democrat before him in the state of Maryland, has continually shit on Baltimore City public schools, like unabashedly, unashamedly. The fact that there are, 4 to 5 casinos in the state of Maryland that bring in literally hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and the fact that every single winter there are schools in Baltimore City and Baltimore County specifically that have to close because they don't have heat. Okay. In the summer, they have to close because they don't have adequate air conditioning. It is embarrassing in a state as wealthy as Maryland that these things happen in public schools. But when you look at whose schools it's happening in, it makes perfect sense. Because even in the face of all this wealth, racism against Black and brown students never goes out of fashion and never goes out of style. And I've always had a problem with governors. Like I said, who was governor before him? O'Malley, and then who was that? Ehrlich, and then who was that? Glendenning. All these Bamas have gone out of their way to make sure that Baltimore City as a whole, not just the schools, but the city specifically struggles. And I've always said this about Maryland. Maryland, it's not as progressive as it looks, okay? It looks nice from the outside. It's not all that nice on the inside.
I say it all the time. Like, this is not a blue state. This is not a blue state. This is a protect your pocket state. And so, for all the people who like to bastardize the words of Martin Luther King Jr., when he talked about the good liberals and what they will do and what they won't do, when there's no interest convergence, when it doesn't benefit the white people who have power in this state, trust and believe it's not going to happen. So, and those are Democrats as well. So the shift that we need to see in this state towards progressivism is immense, and it needs to come out of the blue column. Because we're only blue when it works. Consider the number of people who wouldn't get behind, what's his name? For governor, Ben Jealous.
Brown. Oh, Ben Jealous. Yeah, we should have voted for Ben Jealous.
People would not come out, Democrats would not come out and say they supported the Democratic nominee. Okay, well, that sounds as red as we're going to get. Clearly, somebody's pockets were of great interest over the party. And therefore the people. So just a mess.
It is a mess. And gang, as we talk about schools and what's the future of education, especially in the throes of a pandemic, we definitely have to think about our teachers, because the teachers are out there on the front lines dealing with y'all's little runny nose, snotty nosed children. And we know that how the coronavirus works is that people can be asymptomatic carriers of this disease. And we know kids are full of germs. So I can understand the teacher's trepidation when the president says that he thinks that schools can reopen before the close of this academic school year. And the teachers union in Massachusetts is making their position pretty clear. Let's go to the video.
The unions representing the state's teachers are now upping the pressure on Governor Baker. Now, as of right now, the school closures are set to last until May 4th, but Baker has said there is some desire to see the schools reopen before the end of the year. Well, last night, the Massachusetts Teacher Association released a statement saying, in part, understanding that Massachusetts remains a COVID-19 hotspot, it seems unlikely that definitive assurances will be possible to allow for a reopening before the end of this school year. The Boston Teachers Union tells the Herald it wants schools to stay closed, something Mayor Marty Walsh seems to echo.
At this point, I don't think it's not too confident so we'll have school this year. And I also think next year when school comes back in September, it could be a very different looking situation in the classrooms.
Governor Baker said again yesterday that he'll have a decision on schools soon, including whether to extend the state's stay-at-home advisory, which is also scheduled to expire on May 4th.
Hey, gang. So we're hearing from some teachers unions who say that definitely schools should remain closed. However, the president of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, she said recently that she believes that there should be a 4-week summer school plan implemented for public school students because, according to her, children are backsliding. They are losing a lot of the learning gains that was made before schools were permanently closed, Jackie. I mean, okay, summer school, it sounds good in theory, but I don't quite understand how some of these decisions or some of these proposals are being made when we are still seeing spiking amounts of coronavirus deaths, and we damn sure don't have a handle on coronavirus testing at this point.
There's only one city, not state, but one city in this country that has committed to testing every resident in the city. Just one. Almost, what's it been? 3-4 months after the first case of coronavirus emerged in this country. So we have no idea how many adults are infected with the virus. And we certainly don't know how many children are infected with the virus. And because you said, and it's absolutely true, children or people under 18 can be asymptomatic carriers through no fault of their own. That's just a weird way that the pathogen works. The medical community doesn't understand why, but that's just how it seems to work. So, I mean, you've got people who I think already know that the education system in this country was already woefully inadequate. Underserved kids and families who did not have money, were not people of privilege, didn't have access to all of the additional tools and equipment and materials that that can help you succeed, do not have all of the trappings of comfort. And those kids were already left behind, and they just don't want to address those issues, and they want to put a Band-Aid on the existing problems by saying, oh, well, coronavirus is just causing all these kids to fall behind and we can make it up with summer school. No, you're just being lazy and cheap and just not wanting to address the problems that you've ignored for literally 50 years. 50 years, because remember, Brown versus Board of Education was actually almost 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And the school system in this country is still as segregated as it was when Brown versus Board of Education was litigated. So the inequalities in this system have existed, and we're just talking about the education system. The inequalities in the education system in this country have existed all that time. Coronavirus didn't make it worse. Coronavirus is just exposing how crappy it's been. And these are Band-Aid solutions that not only are not going to solve the problem, but they're actually going to put more people at risk of contracting this virus. It's just such a horrible disaster.
Skeptical Mantis in the YouTube comments says, quote, the Black Panther Party provided food, clothes, and healthcare and other valuable services to their communities. Meanwhile, Bernie just talked about it for 60 years. It's time for a real revolution. Khalilah, talking about reopening schools, I feel like almost the kids are being used a bit as a pawn, at least by the White House, because I feel like President Trump is like, oh, well, if we open up schools, get schools reopened, then that is a harbinger to the progress that is being made against the fight against coronavirus. So, yeah, let's just send the kids back to school so investors can feel reassured on Wall Street that everything else will start to open up. Are you going to send your kids back to school? if school comes back in September and they say it's time for kids to go back to school, are you sending your kids to school?
No. My kids will not go back to school until a clear protocol is developed to treat the virus and a vaccine has been identified and is at least in the final stages of testing. Listen, there is no way I don't know what Bernie Sanders had to do with the gentleman's comment just now, but here's the thing. Nobody is coming to save us. And the idea, and Donald Trump saying that kids should go back to school is even more insidious than the stock market, I believe. It's also, we have a lot of governors who are trying to disrupt the unemployment insurance system by sending people back to work. And if they don't come to work, then they have ostensibly quit their job. Right. And so they're no longer on the rolls of the federal government for unemployment or their state unemployment program. They now become people who quit their jobs. Right. They're not eligible for those benefits. So I think it goes beyond just trying to send a signal on the backs of our children. It's also trying to preserve an economy that he believes will be tanked and go against his capacity for getting reelected, though he wasn't really elected the last time by 3 million people, give or take. So, going back to school for 4 weeks in the summer makes no sense to me. Are they going to send the teachers to school in bubbles? Are kids going to be saran wrapped? I don't see how that's possible. You cannot have children running around, then they touch the babysitter, they touch their friends, they touch their sibling, they touch their grandma. Cycle starts again the next day. They see the mailman, they say hello, they're touching cars. Like, you can bring back as few students as you want. One child could be a walking time bomb if people in his or her home have the virus and they're asymptomatic, or they're just carrying it on their clothes. So it may sound good, this 4 weeks in the summer. I submit that we need to slow down a lot and get to creating schools that work for all of our children. Just the idea that we would anyway go back to what was happening on March 11th is a travesty of justice. So let's move beyond racial equity. That would be against racial justice, because this country has a debt to its Black Americans, to Indigenous people, to Asian Americans, and particularly those communities who help build our roads and our railways. Listen, that debt is in no way being paid, and it is being laid bare by this pandemic. So the idea that there are people in power, regardless of whether or not they claim themselves to be progressive or not, who would suggest children are back in schools in the summer, should tell people how America feels about the new majority of students in schools, and that's children of color.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I'm sorry. What the commenter said and what you said, Dr. Harris. The commenter made the comment about the Black Panther Party, and what you said, Dr. Harris, about nobody is coming to save us. The interesting thing that is happening in so many of these underserved communities, our communities where we live around the country, around every issue that we face, whether it's access to food or education, are mutual aid societies that are springing up because nobody is coming to save us. Government show ain't, because we know that, we understand that history, and these organizations are springing up out of the tradition of the Black Panther Party for self-defense, for these kinds of things. Right here in DC, Maurice Cook, who is the founder of Serve Your City DC and one of the organizers of the Ward 6 Mutual Aid Society, which has grown to serve all 8 wards of the city, they are collecting donations for laptops to loan to students who have no resources. They have no equipment to continue to go to school. This is what regular folk are having to do because nobody is coming to save us. So while we have to do this in this moment for that reason, we also have to be working on how do we change this moment, this where we're doing this out of necessity. How do we turn this into a policy so that no child gets left out of having all of the resources they need all across this country? And that does involve political engagement, but we have to be very careful that we're not co-opted by this completely fucked up political process and
That's
these
right.
political parties that created this situation in the first place.
We need to follow the money, frankly.
Yeah.
And keep our eye on the ball. And simultaneously, we need to be making sure that people aren't selling us. And here's a situation that a lot of Black and brown communities are in. You have folk who are working or required to work because they're not in jobs where they can simply telework from home and be mindful of their children. So now you have families between a rock and a hard place. There are no daycares open. Many places they could have sent their kids are closed because they could not rapidly access PPP dollars. And so you have parents who are making a decision, do I go to work and leave my children here? Or do I support them sending children back to school and trust that the government is not oblivious to the harm they're looking to cause our children? There are so many strategies that we can be looking at. In Baltimore City, they've begun to use public access television to broadcast lessons at different grade levels. That's one stopgap, but beyond that, for time immemorial, we've known how to educate our own children. And so reliance on community, relinquishing control back to community of schools educating their children and partnering with them, industry, elected officials, to really get out there and make sure we are thinking about the types of schools we want to have open, because we know grade level is meaningless. All the kids are at the same place. So if you move all the kids forward, nobody's left behind, right? The problem is we have so far removed ourselves from mastery of concepts and skills to simply covering content just so you can say, you know, I know when the Ride of Paul Revere was, so I can move on to the next grade level. Except I don't know how to write a full essay, right? Makes no sense. I've covered content, but I've mastered nothing. And that is a problem that we really have to look at, because if we send our kids back to school this summer, it is May 1st tomorrow. There's no way you're going to tell me there will be enough protective gear in place and social distancing to have children in schools when we have communities that have yet to hit their spike. So if you go up the street or across the border to West Virginia or Kentucky or whatever the case may be, that have lower cases and they're beginning to see more cases coming about, and you go to visit your relative and you come back, you know, you've now participated in spreading the virus somewhere else because there is not a vaccine. And that is irresponsible. So while I appreciate what was being said around, you know, doing 4 weeks in the summer to avoid learning loss and slippage, we need to determine another way, and we need to rely on community members and pay them. There are lots of people out of work right now. You know,
well, gang,
let's make sure people get paid for their work.
I want us to switch gears a bit because, you know, Congress is working on stuff, I guess, and you know, right. That's why I said I guess I don't really know what they're doing. They are giving the appearance of working. I guess they're mastering their social media skills, making TikTok videos. I don't know what the hell these people are doing. I don't know what they were doing even before now. However, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Elizabeth Warren are getting together. They had a hangout online, and what they're talking about is presenting a bill in Congress where small businesses would not be gobbled up or consolidated by larger corporations, you know, big Wall Street entities. Let's hear about what they had to say.
We saw during the 2008-2009 financial crisis that there was a lot of consolidation then in the financial services industry. And when I say consolidation, I mean two things. One is a lot of little banks got gobbled up, a lot of small financial institutions got eaten. And the second is the big got a whole lot bigger. And that gave them a lot more power in the marketplace to continue to squeeze out more small businesses, and a lot more political power.
When these big businesses get bigger, it also hurts our workers, because that means more and more workers could potentially be put in the vulnerable position of being employed by a bigger and bigger company with more and more power to erode our rights.
And you know, that is what the data show. And that is when you see more concentration in an industry, you see worker pay and benefits start to decline. These two things are very much related to each other. So we've put together this bill. The basic idea is to put in place a moratorium on big businesses gobbling up little businesses.
I mean, it sounds fair to me. I think that's exactly what we need. We're in a state of emergency, and we need to make sure that that the people that are open right now are essential businesses, and the work that we are doing is essential. And right now, I just don't think that mergers and acquisitions are necessarily an essential business in a moment of crisis. I'm glad to be a part of it, and I think that this is one of those big macro issues that is actually going to impact all of our lives.
Man, where were y'all in 1996 when Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act and killed the media industry? That's exactly what happened to media right there. Radio, TV stations, newspapers got gobbled up by larger corporations. People lost their jobs. Salaries went down. It all went to shit. We all see how the media is now. Well, there you go. Now, obviously, in theory and in practice, this sounds like a fantastic idea. What is the likelihood? Well, first, let me get y'all's thoughts on what the senator and the congresswoman have proposed. Jacqueline Luqman.
I mean, sure, it sounds good. It makes sense, but it's too late. I mean, the companies, really, the companies, I would be surprised if it passed, because you've got, on the one hand, you've got Mitch McConnell already saying that he is not going to pass another a relief package unless it includes liability insurance for businesses that decide to open, which means that they know full well that people who are forced to go back to work are going to get sick, and some of them are going to die, and they want to make sure that people don't sue companies for forcing them to come back to work. So, I mean, these are people who already don't care about whether we live or die in this crisis. And then on the other hand, you've got companies like Amazon and Walmart that have already become behemoths because they were allowed to gobble up mom and pop businesses for decades. So again, it's one of those things where this is not a crisis that coronavirus caused. This is something that has been going on. It's gotten way out of control, and people are thinking they're going to stop this juggernaut, this capitalist, monopolistic juggernaut, now that coronavirus has raised this issue to the fore, but I don't see it happening.
Khalilah, I'm curious as to your thoughts. I mean, Jackie brings up a good point. Yep. I mean, this thing that AOC and Liz Warren want to tackle and address and help fight, this fight has been lost. You know what I mean? I mean, and it's been lost for some time. But I found it interesting that Senator Warren was referencing the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, where we did see a lot of small banks fall by the wayside. Not to say that they shouldn't have fell by the wayside, but some of them, I mean, were community banks that targeted and served very specific populations who may not have access to larger banks. So that definitely was a deficiency in that area. But I'm curious as to what do you think about what they are proposing and the likelihood of it actually going through?
First and foremost, the proposal is right. Just as Jackie said, it's the right thing to do, but in another couple of weeks, in many places, Main Street won't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. The number, and particularly those businesses that are owned by Black and brown people, frankly, mm-hmm. who have not been able to get access to the PPP dollars and have mm-hmm. had to fold their hair salons, fold their boutique cafe, fold their yoga studio, fold their wholeness and healing centers because they were not able to get access. They weren't in the know in the way that larger organizations were. And, they won't even be around to be swallowed up by a massive corporation. When we see Shake Shack deciding not to take their dollars because they apply for PPP. Now, I will say Shake Shack is a franchise-based organization, so you do have small business owners in the franchise. But the idea that these massive corporations even click the send button to get the small business dollars tells us a whole lot around whether or not there is somebody guarding the shop, whether or not these committees that are taking forever for Senate and House leadership to staff with elected officials, how long it's taken for them to get moving and really watch where these dollars are going. You know, again, follow the money. These small businesses will fold before a big business can pick them up. And what's really troubling about that is, you know, we had food deserts before. We're going to see the expansion of that because you have so many businesses, bodegas, corner stores, which were the places where people would get their groceries, right? Because they couldn't drive out to the 24-hour mega Walmart.
Well, wait, Khalilah, I'm sorry, Dr. Harris. Let me interrupt you for a second because I want to throw something out there and get you and Jackie's take on it. Because what I'm sort of envisioning here is, you know, Starbucks will take over, you know, the local cafe that the sister own, you know, the vegan smoothies and all that good stuff that, you know, all of us like to enjoy from time to time. And it'll still be, you know, Zola's Cafe, a subsidiary of Starbucks. But part of the deal that Starbucks made with Sister Zola is that, you know, we're going to take over control over 75% of your business and leave you with this small amount. But because people are in such a desperate situation, you know, we're at 30 million people unemployed, filing for unemployment benefits, and nearly half of the jobs in this country come from small businesses. So are these corporations, and it's not a matter of if, they certainly are, but we know that they are in a predatory position to make people accept less because they are desperate. Is that a scenario that you could possibly foresee for small business owners?
Absolutely. And, you know, let me be clear, there will be situations where that's really a good deal to maintain a business that means a lot in the community. That short of that opportunity, if you have a bigger business that is not unscrupulous, making that kind of deal can save some businesses in some communities. I don't want to make this one-sided or myopic in terms of those businesses should remain just as they are, because some of them were, you know, a lot of small businesses function with 2 weeks of payroll, a month of payroll maximum. And frankly, without the PPP, would be closing without some of those deals going. But I'm not aware of that happening just yet. I do believe that there are going to be small businesses taken advantage of by predatory big business if no one's watching. And I won't even say if no one's watching, it's going to happen with people watching, because there's just no other way for people to sustain. I will also say that, you know, in the face of a disruptive economy, we'll see new businesses opening. And we're really going to have to double down on equity and make sure people have access if they do want to become entrepreneurs in the face of millions of jobs being wiped out.
Yeah.
Jackie, I'll let you have the last word. Go ahead.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that you know, there will be some bigger businesses, I think, that will be good community partners and not wanting to see their neighbors be, you know, go out of business and not want to change the services and the flavor and the soul of the neighborhood. But, you know, look, I'm a pessimist, so I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of that. What I am more concerned with, and I shouldn't say more concerned, but my concern is that a lot of small businesses that are going to be able to access some kind of funds through this PPP will be on the back end taken advantage of when it comes time to pay back these loans, right? Where the bigger businesses are going to be able to have their loans forgiven, but the smaller businesses are not. And then they're going to be penalized, and then they're eventually going to be taken over on the back end. That's my concern.
Ladies, you know, we're coming to the close of the hour. I think we have time for one more story. Oh, I know, we're having a ball. Wait a second. Hold on. We got some comments here in the comment section. I can't pronounce this, my brother. I'm so sorry. Inequities, Ogubu. He says, do you feel our safety net is over-reliant on schools while funded inequitably to provide the limited resources while not also investing in communities and families that surround schools? I mean, that's a really interesting point because I live in Prince George's County, Maryland, and here the schools have been providing, I think, breakfast, snack, and lunch for children since the shutdown. I mean, they have to go pick it up. I know that was something that they were doing. I'm not actually sure if they're still doing it. But because a lot of families are food insecure, even in a wealthy state, relatively speaking, like Maryland and the District of Columbia, a lot of that money is not in Black people's hands. And people do rely on the services that schools provide for free in order to meet their basic daily survival needs. Are we too dependent on schools? Do we ask too much of teachers? I mean, teachers are a lot of times de facto social workers and psychologists and a lot of other things for children that, maybe they didn't necessarily sign up for. Khalilah, I know you're in the education field. Can you speak to the overdependence that society has on schools in general to be a fix for so many of the failures from state, local, and the federal government?
Absolutely. It's been a major cop-out for decades. Even the reforms of the past few decades were pretty much done to community instead of with community, under the guise of, if your kid just goes to a great school, charter school A, B, C, or D, then they are going to come out and be huge successes. And they really operated from a deficit model that the community was a problem, right? That families were a problem, that children were at-risk youth. And the only risk that they had facing them was racism and white supremacy and systemic oppression. Because if communities were provided with the resources that they needed, communities figure out how to thrive. And what we know is when there is absent an economic development strategy that includes schools, as opposed to schools remediating all of the ways government and other community structures let down the most vulnerable people who became that way because of things like redlining, and then fast forward to predatory lending. Then you see that schools are placed in an untenable position where they're being asked to address issues not created by schools. And then the schools begin to suffer, and then they're not having the outcomes that we'd like to see for our young people. And it's all connected to lack of housing, lack of transportation, lack of jobs. So all of those things are interrelated. We cannot move forward from this pandemic under the guise of if they're just in a good school. Because there's no such thing as a good school in a community that's struggling to use the assets that it has to practice self-determination and be able to function outside of waiting for the government to come in and improve their condition.
I have nothing to add. I have nothing to add to that at all. That was all of that.
We're here together. We're here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, ladies, obviously tomorrow is May Day. We have a big show planned here on Stir Crazy, talking about all the planned actions and organizing that is happening. This is a very pivotal time for workers in this country. We can actually reach out, grab, seize, demand a lot of the things that people have been clamoring for out of necessity. So that is on the calendar for Stir Crazy tomorrow. But also tomorrow, we are premiering here on The Real News a documentary about the 5-year anniversary of the murder of 25-year-old Freddie Gray. Happened in 2015. It sparked the Baltimore uprising. The name of the documentary is called Freddie Gray, 5 years later. Let's have a look.
I have to say that the killing of Freddie Gray, it was not right. I mean, I miss him so much.
So many people there at his funeral. I was glad that he had so much of love and support.
It really was a watershed moment. Baltimore has a long history of uprisings, of rioting, of people pushing back, of racial conflict in many ways. The culmination of not only the long arc of Baltimore's history playing itself out repeatedly, but also the Black Lives Matter movement with the non-indictments of the officers that killed Mike Brown in Ferguson, the officers that killed Eric Gardner in New York.
400 years of resentment built up in folks, and everybody, every community, every person has a breaking point.
Police the police because they cannot police themselves.
Gang, like I said, Freddie Gray, 5 years later, premieres right here on The Real News, 7 o'clock tomorrow. Do not miss it. This is something you absolutely do not want to miss. It is very well done. It's something that we're very proud of, and we hope you tune back here to watch it. Gang, that's the end of Stir Crazy. I'd like to thank our fantastic, lovely panelists for joining us. Dr. Khalilah Harris, Jacqueline Luqman, we appreciate y'all stopping by.
Anytime.
Thank you.
And also, gang, don't forget, tonight is the premiere of the Police Accountability Report hosted by Taya Graham and Stephen Janis. It is one of my favorite offerings that we have here on the Real News Network that keep it 100% real. They don't shy away or back down from the very real issues of police brutality that is impacting our communities really from coast to coast and really around the world. So tonight, 9 o'clock, Police Accountability Report. Be sure to tune back in. All right, I'm your host, Kim Brown. I will see you guys tomorrow for another episode of Stir Crazy. Y'all take care. Have a good one.